What would you do if your own family changed the locks on your house and threw your belongings out in trash bags? What if they called the police on you for stealing from the very home your grandmother left you? And what if a secret recording revealed the shocking truth about what they tried to do to a dying woman? This is the story of how I discovered my family's betrayal ran deeper than I ever imagined, and how I fought back to reclaim not just my inheritance but my power. You won't believe how this ends. Picture this. You're driving home from a 3-day business trip, exhausted from corporate meetings and stale airport coffee, looking forward to nothing more than collapsing on your own couch. You pull into the driveway of what you thought was your home, grab your suitcase from the trunk, and walk up to the front door like you've done 1,000 times before. But when you slide your key into the lock, it doesn't turn. Not even a little bit. You jiggle it, thinking maybe you're just tired. Maybe you're not doing it right. You try again, putting more pressure on it. But the key sits there like it's never seen this lock before in its life. That was me 3 weeks ago. Mia Thompson, 28 years old, marketing executive, thought I had my life pretty well figured out. I just spent 3 days in Chicago presenting to clients the kind of trip that makes you feel successful and professional and like you're actually adulting correctly. I thought I was coming home from a business trip ready to kick off my heels, order some Thai food, and maybe binge watch something mindless on Netflix. Instead, I was about to be shut out of my own life. The key wouldn't turn, not even a millimeter. I'm standing there on the front porch, pulling on this door handle like an idiot, when I notice something else that makes my stomach drop. There are garbage bags on the porch, 4 black trash bags that definitely weren't there when I left for Chicago. And when I look closer, I can see clothes spilling out of them. My clothes, my favorite sweater, the one my grandmother knitted for me, my running shoes, my toiletries scattered in a plastic bag like I'm being evicted. That's when my phone buzzes. A text from my sister Sophia. I look down at the screen, and for a second, my brain can't process what I'm reading. 8 words that flip my entire world upside down. Locks changed. You're not welcome here. I stare at that message, reading it over and over again, thinking maybe I'm misunderstanding something. Maybe this is some kind of joke, some misunderstanding that we'll laugh about later. But there's nothing funny about the tone of that text. It's cold, final, like she's talking to a stranger. I call her immediately, my hands shaking so bad I can barely hit her number. Sophia, what the hell is going on? Why are my things outside? Why doesn't my key work? The silence on the other end of the line lasts forever. Then her voice, colder than I've ever heard it. We've been talking, Mom, Dad, and me. This house belongs to all of us, not just you. What are you talking about? I'm practically screaming now, standing on this porch surrounded by garbage bags full of my life. This is my house, Sophia. Grandma left it to me. Legally. Officially. Maybe legally, she says, and there's something in her voice that makes my blood run cold. But not morally. Now, most people would probably start crying right there on the porch. Maybe call their parents, beg for answers, demand to know what the hell was going on. Maybe break down completely and have a full-scale emotional meltdown in front of the neighbors. But me, I did what I always do when my family decides to blindside me with their drama. I got sarcastic. I texted back, "Wow, Sophia, really going for that Sister of the Year award, aren't you? Should I expect the eviction notice in the mail, or are you hand-delivering that too?" But here's the thing about sarcasm when you're falling apart inside. It's like putting a band-aid on a broken bone. It doesn't actually fix anything. It just makes you look like you're handling it when really your hands are shaking so bad you can barely type, and you're fighting back tears that feel like they're going to drown you. Because standing there, locked out of my grandmother's house, surrounded by my belongings in trash bags, like I'm some kind of vagrant, I realized this wasn't just about changed locks or family disagreements. This wasn't even about the house, not really. This was war, and somehow without even knowing there was a battle happening, I'd become the enemy. But I had no idea how deep this betrayal actually went. I had no idea that my own family had been planning this for months, or that they'd been lying to me, manipulating me, and setting me up for this moment since the day my grandmother died. Standing on that porch looking at my life stuffed into garbage bags, I thought I understood betrayal. I was about to learn I didn't know the first thing about it. But before I tell you how this whole mess unraveled, you need to understand who we're dealing with here. Because this story isn't just about locks and keys. It's about family. And family, well, that's where things get complicated fast. I'm Mia, 28 years old, born and raised in Boston. I work in marketing for a tech company downtown, the kind of place where everyone drinks kombucha and talks about synergy. Good job, decent apartment in Back Bay, solid credit score, the kind of life that looks pretty successful from the outside. I've always been the independent one, the introvert who preferred books to parties, the daughter who moved out at 18 and never looked back. My idea of a perfect Friday night takeout Thai food, a good documentary, and absolutely no drama. Should have known that was too good to last. My parents are Linda and Ethan Thompson. Classic New England family, 3 generations deep in the same neighborhood. Mom's a high school principal at one of those prestigious prep schools where parents pay 40 grand a year to make sure their kids get into Harvard. She's the kind of woman who runs her school like a military operation and expects the same level of discipline at home. Everything has to be perfect, scheduled, controlled. Even family dinners came with an agenda. Dad's a retired firefighter, 25 years on the Boston Fire Department, still built like he could carry someone down a ladder if he had to. He's got these massive hands that are permanently stained with engine grease from working on vintage cars in his garage. People in the neighborhood still call him Chief, even though he's been retired for 3 years. He's a good man, the kind who'd give you the shirt off his back if you needed it. But he's also old school in ways that sometimes make you want to scream. They're good people, don't get me wrong, but they've always had this way of making everything feel like a performance review, like love was something you had to earn by meeting their expectations, not something you just got for being their daughter. Then there's my younger sister, Sophia. She's 25, 3 years younger than me, and the complete opposite of everything I am. Where I'm quiet and methodical, she's the life of every party. Where I plan everything out 6 months in advance, she follows her heart and figures out the details later. She's got this infectious laugh that can fill up a whole room, and she's never met a stranger. Growing up, she was the golden child, the one who could charm her way out of any trouble. And where I left home at 18 to build my own life in the city, she just moved back in with our parents after her latest relationship crashed and burned. Relationship number, honestly, I lost count after guy number 8. Sophia has this pattern of falling head over heels for men who promise her the world and then disappear when things get real. This last one, Marcus, was supposed to be different. They were together for 2 years, living in this cute little apartment in Cambridge, talking about marriage and babies and forever. Until she came home one day and found him packing his stuff. No explanation, no fight, no warning. Just, I need space to figure things out. Classic Marcus. So Sophia moved back to the family nest to lick her wounds, and suddenly, I'm the sister who abandoned the family, while she's the one who came home when she needed us. The dynamics were set, and I should have seen the resentment building. But here's the thing that makes this whole situation so twisted, so much more complicated than a simple sibling rivalry. None of this drama was supposed to happen at my parents' house. It was happening at Grandma Eleanor's house, and that changes everything. My grandmother was the heart of our family. Not just the heart, she was the soul, the gravitational center that kept us all orbiting in the same universe. When my parents were working their demanding jobs, when they were too busy being responsible adults to really see me, Grandma Eleanor was there. I spent half my childhood in her Victorian house on Elm Street, with its creaky wooden floors and windows that caught the morning light just right. That house was built in 1887, and Eleanor had lived there for 63 years. She moved in as a young bride and never left, raising 4 kids, burying a husband, and creating a sanctuary that felt separate from the rest of the world. It had these high ceilings with original crown moldings that she'd painted and repainted a dozen times, a wraparound porch with a swing where we'd sit for hours watching the seasons change, and this incredible garden that Eleanor tended like it was her own personal paradise. Every room told a story. The kitchen still had the original farmhouse sink where she'd taught me to wash dishes when I was barely tall enough to reach the faucet. The living room had built-in bookshelves filled with everything from classic literature to trashy romance novels because Eleanor believed in reading whatever made you happy. And the front parlor had these massive windows that turned the whole room golden in the afternoon light. That house wasn't just a building. It was magic. It was the place where I learned that homes could be sanctuaries, that love could live in wallpaper and floorboards and the way light fell across a kitchen table. I remember one afternoon, when I was maybe 12, sitting in Eleanor's kitchen while she made her famous apple pie from scratch. The whole house smelled like cinnamon and love, and she was humming this old song while she rolled out the dough. I was doing homework at her kitchen table, struggling with some math problem that made no sense when she stopped what she was doing and looked at me with those wise blue eyes. "You see the soul of this house, Mia," she said, flour dusting her hands as she gestured around the room. "Most people just see walls and furniture square footage and property values. But you understand what makes a place holy." I didn't know what she meant back then. I thought she was just being sentimental the way grandmothers are supposed to be. But standing on that porch with keys that wouldn't work, I was about to find out exactly how right she was. Because Grandma Eleanor didn't just leave me a house when she died 6 months ago. She left me a war zone. Eleanor passed away on a Tuesday morning in March, 91 years old, peacefully in her sleep, which is exactly how she would have wanted it. I got the call at 6 a.m. from my dad, his voice thick with tears he was trying not to shed. "She's gone, Mia. Mom found her this morning. She just slipped away." Even though we all knew it was coming, even though Eleanor had been getting weaker for months, it felt like someone had ripped the foundation right out from under my world. She wasn't just my grandmother. She was my anchor, my safe harbor, the one person in our family who loved me exactly as I was without trying to fix or change or improve me. The next few days were a blur of funeral preparations, flower arrangements, and phone calls to relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone had a story about Eleanor, about how she'd touched their lives, about what a remarkable woman she was. And she was remarkable, but she was also mine in a way that felt sacred and private and impossible to explain to anyone else. The funeral was everything you'd expect from a woman who'd lived 91 years in the same neighborhood. The church was packed, standing room only, with people spilling out into the parking lot. Beautiful flowers everywhere, the kind of elaborate arrangements that cost more than most people's rent. Everyone sharing stories about how Eleanor had helped them through difficult times, how she'd baked casseroles when they were sick, how she'd sat with them when they were grieving. I gave a eulogy about her garden, about how she taught me that growing things takes patience, and faith, about how she could make anything bloom with enough love and attention. What I couldn't say in front of all those people, was that she was the only person in my family who ever made me feel like I belonged, like I was enough exactly as I was. The reception afterward was held at the community center, and I spent 3 hours accepting condolences from people who meant well, but didn't really understand what I'd lost. My parents were gracious hosts, thanking everyone for coming, sharing memories, playing the part of the grieving family. Sophia was there too, looking beautiful in her black dress, crying at all the right moments, accepting hugs from neighbors who remembered her as Eleanor's sweet youngest granddaughter. But I felt like I was watching it all from outside, like I was observing someone else's funeral for someone else's grandmother. Because none of them knew Eleanor the way I did. None of them had spent countless hours on her porch swing listening to her stories about the old days. None of them had helped her plant bulbs in her garden every fall or sat with her in comfortable silence while she worked on her crossword puzzles. I thought that was the hardest part. The funeral, the finality, the realization that I'd never hear her voice again, or smell her perfume, or feel her soft hands holding mine. I was wrong. The real shock came 2 weeks later. We're all sitting in this sterile conference room at Morrison Klein and Associates Eleanor's law firm. Gray, carpet, gray walls, gray furniture that probably cost more than my car. The kind of place that screams serious legal business and makes you feel like you should whisper. Mom, Dad, Sophia, and me sitting around this massive mahogany table like we're about to negotiate a peace treaty. I figured this would be pretty straightforward. Maybe I'd get some of her jewelry, the pearl necklace she always wore to church. Maybe a few $1,000s enough to pay for a nice vacation in her memory. Sophia had been living in the house for the past 6 months, helping take care of Eleanor when she got too weak to manage alone, so I assumed she'd probably inherit most of it. That seemed fair. She'd earned it. The lawyer, Mr. Morrison, was this distinguished older man with silver hair and glasses that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He had Eleanor's will in front of him, this thick document bound in blue paper that looked official and intimidating. He started reading, and it was pretty standard stuff at first. Some money to various charities, her car to my dad, her china set to my mom. Eleanor had always been organized, always thinking ahead. So none of this surprised me. She'd probably planned this down to the last detail years ago. But then, Mr. Morrison cleared his throat and looked directly at me. To my granddaughter Mia, he read his voice, formal and careful. I leave my home at 847 Elm Street along with all furnishings, property, and belongings contained therein to be hers solely and completely without restriction or condition. The silence in that room was so complete you could have heard a pin drop in the hallway. I'm staring at this lawyer like he just told me I'd won the lottery and discovered the cure for cancer at the same time. My brain is trying to process what he just said, but it doesn't make sense. The house, Eleanor's house, my house. My parents are sitting there with their mouths hanging open like fish out of water. Dad's face has gone completely white, and Mom looks like someone just slapped her across the face. But Sophia looked like her entire world had just collapsed. Her face went through about 6 different emotions in 10 seconds. Shock, confusion, hurt, and then something that looked dangerously close to rage. There has to be a mistake, my mom said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Eleanor always talked about keeping the house in the family. She meant for everyone to share it. She wouldn't have just given it to one person. Mr. Morrison shook his head with the patient expression of someone who'd handled a lot of family drama over the years. I can assure you, Mrs. Thompson, there's no mistake. Mrs. Eleanor was very specific about her wishes. In fact, she came in 3 times over the past year to make sure everything was exactly as she wanted it. Then, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope with my name written on it in Eleanor's careful, elegant handwriting. She also asked me to give this to you, Mia. My hands were shaking as I opened it. The letter was written on Eleanor's personal stationery, the cream-colored paper with her initials embossed at the top that she used for special occasions. My dearest Mia, it began, and I could hear her voice in every word. This house is yours. Not because you deserve it more than the others, but because you understand its legacy. You see what others cannot see. You know that a house is more than wood and nails and real estate values. You understand that a home is about love, about sanctuary, about creating a place where souls can rest and hearts can heal. I've watched you in this house for years, seen how you move through these rooms, like you're part of their history. You know which floorboard creaks in the hallway, which window sticks in the summer, which corner of the garden gets the best morning light. You don't just see a building when you look at this place. You see a home. I'm trusting you to protect it, to preserve it, to make sure it continues to be a place of love and beauty long after I'm gone. Don't let anyone tell you that you don't deserve this. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for accepting what I freely give. This is my choice, made with a clear mind and a grateful heart. Take care of our house, sweetheart. and let it take care of you. I was crying by the time I finished reading. Real tears, the kind that come from somewhere deep and raw and grateful. Eleanor had seen me, really seen me, and she'd trusted me with the thing she loved most in the world. The drive home was the most awkward car ride in the history of awkward car rides. Nobody knew what to say. Sophia rode with my parents, and I drove alone, which pretty much set the tone for everything that came after. I kept looking in my rearview mirror, watching their car behind me, wondering what they were talking about, what they were planning. But here's the thing that's been haunting me ever since that day, the memory that should have warned me what was coming. About a year before Eleanor died, we were sitting on her porch swing on a warm summer evening, watching the fireflies dance in her garden. She'd made lemonade the real kind with fresh lemons, and we were just enjoying the peace of the evening when she asked me this strange question out of nowhere. "Mia," she said, her voice unusually serious, "what if people want to take this place away from you? What if they think they deserve it more than you do? What if they try to make you feel guilty for having something beautiful?" I laughed it off at the time. Eleanor was always worrying about hypothetical problems, always planning for disasters that would never happen. I thought she was just being dramatic, maybe worried about property taxes or maintenance costs or the usual concerns of an aging homeowner. "Grandma, that's never going to happen," I said. "This is your house. You get to decide what happens to it." She was quiet for a long moment, just swinging gently back and forth, listening to the creak of the old chains. "Promise me something," she said finally. "If that day ever comes, if people try to take this away from you or make you feel like you don't deserve it, promise me you'll fight for it. Not because it's valuable, but because it's yours. Because I chose you. I promise," I said, still thinking. This was all just grandmother worry, the kind of thing elderly people fixate on when they have too much time to think about what-if scenarios. But now, standing on that same porch with keys that wouldn't work, I realized she wasn't being dramatic at all. She was giving me a warning, and she was preparing me for war. So I moved in. And let me tell you, there's something surreal about inheriting a house that's been frozen in time for decades. Eleanor's coffee cup was still in the sink, still stained with the last sip of coffee she'd ever drank. Her reading glasses were still on the kitchen table, folded next to a half-finished crossword puzzle where she'd written "legacy" in 7 across, but never got to fill in the rest. Her slippers were by the back door. Her favorite sweater was draped over the chair where she always sat to watch the morning news. The house still smelled like her perfume, that soft floral scent that had followed her around for as long as I could remember. For the first week, I barely touched anything. I felt like I was living in a museum, like I was trespassing in someone else's life. But I couldn't just live in a shrine forever. Eleanor wouldn't have wanted that. She'd left me this house to live in it, to love it, to make it mine, while still honoring what she'd built. So I started small. Gentle renovations that would make Eleanor proud, changes that preserved the soul of the place while bringing it into the 21st century. I began with the hardwood floors. They were original to the house, probably installed in 1887, but they'd been covered with area rugs for so long that nobody remembered what they looked like underneath. When I pulled up those rugs, I found this gorgeous, honey-colored wood with character marks and grain patterns that told the story of everyone who had ever walked across them. I spent 2 weeks refinishing those floors, by hand sanding away decades of wear, bringing back that warm glow that had been hidden under layers of neglect. It was meditative work, the kind that lets your mind wander while your hands stay busy. I kept thinking about Eleanor, about all the times she'd walked across these same boards, about the children who'd played on them the Christmas mornings and birthday parties, and quiet evenings that had happened in these rooms. Next, I tackled the porch swing, the one where Eleanor and I had shared so many conversations, where she'd told me stories about the old days and listened to me complain about whatever teenage drama was consuming my life at the moment. The wood was weathered and the chains were rusty, but the bones were still good. I sanded it down and painted it the same soft blue it had been when I was a kid, the color of a spring sky just before sunset. I oiled the chains until they moved smoothly again, and when I finally sat on it for the first time, it still creaked in exactly the same way it always had. Like coming home. The garden was my biggest project. Eleanor had been the kind of gardener who could make anything grow, who knew exactly which plants would thrive in which corners of the yard. But in her final months when she was too weak to get outside, everything had started to go wild. Not dead, just untamed. I spent hours out there pulling weeds and pruning overgrown bushes, replanting the flower beds with the same varieties Eleanor had always loved. Roses, hydrangeas, peonies that bloomed like pink and white explosions every June. I even found her old garden journal where she'd kept notes about what to plant, when which flowers attracted, which butterflies, which vegetables grew best in the morning sun versus the afternoon shade. Everything I did with love, with respect, with the kind of care you give to something sacred. I wasn't trying to erase Eleanor's presence or impose my own style. I was trying to honor what she'd built while making it mine. But apparently, that wasn't good enough for my family. My mom started showing up unannounced about 3 weeks after I'd moved in. Not calling first, not asking if it was a good time, just appearing on the doorstep like she still lived there. At first, I thought maybe she was just missing Eleanor. Maybe she needed to be in the house to feel close to her memory. But it quickly became clear that these weren't grief visits. They were inspections. She'd walk through the house with this critical eye, examining everything I'd changed, commenting on every decision I'd made. The first time she saw me painting the kitchen cabinets, she actually gasped like I'd committed some kind of sacrilege. "Grandma would never paint over those cabinets, Mia," she said, running her fingers along the door I'd just finished. She loved that wood stain. She spent hours conditioning that wood to get it just the right color. I tried to explain that the wood underneath was actually rotting in places that moisture had gotten into the joints and the stain was peeling off in chunks. I showed her the spots where the wood was soft and spongy, where bugs had started to make homes in the deteriorating finish. "I'm preserving what I can and updating what needs updating," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable. "These cabinets will last another 50 years now instead of falling apart." But she just shook her head like I was some kind of vandal who didn't understand the value of what I was destroying. "There are ways to restore wood without painting over it," she said. "Eleanor would have found a way to save them." What she didn't say, but what I heard loud and clear, was that Eleanor would have done it better. That Eleanor would have found a solution I was too lazy or too ignorant to figure out. It was the same pattern every time she visited. She'd find something I'd changed, something I'd updated or modernized, and she'd explain why it was wrong, why Eleanor wouldn't have approved, why I was failing to live up to the legacy I'd inherited. Sophia was different, harder to read. She'd come by sometimes, usually when I was working on something, and she'd watch me for a while without saying much. Then she'd offer to help, or she'd compliment whatever I was doing. "Oh, that looks great," she'd say when I showed her the refinished floors. "Eleanor would love what you're doing with this place." But there was something off about her praise, something performative and hollow, like she was reading lines from a script instead of speaking from her heart. There was this distance in her voice, this coolness that hadn't been there before Eleanor died. Like she was acting the part of the supportive sister while feeling something entirely different underneath. I should have paid more attention to that performance. I should have asked her directly what was bothering her, why she seemed so detached from everything I was doing. But I was so focused on the house, so consumed with getting everything perfect, that I missed the warning signs. The breaking point came about 2 months after I'd moved in. I was having dinner with my parents and Sophia at their house, and I made the mistake of sharing my biggest dream for Eleanor's house. The project I'd been planning and researching and getting excited about for weeks. "I want to turn the front parlor into an art gallery," I said, cutting into my mom's pot roast and trying to sound casual about it. Nothing commercial, nothing that would change the residential nature of the neighborhood. Just a small by-appointment-only space where local artists can showcase their work. The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. My dad stopped chewing and put down his fork. My mom's face went completely still. Sophia just stared at me like I'd announced I was joining a cult. "You want to turn Grandma's house into a business?" My dad said, his voice flat and disbelieving. "It's not a business," I said quickly. "There's no admission fee, no sales commission, no profit motive. It's a community space, a way to honor Eleanor's memory by continuing her legacy of supporting people's dreams and creativity." I'd thought about this for weeks, researched everything about zoning laws and permits and neighborhood regulations. Eleanor had always loved art, had always encouraged creative people, had always believed that beauty and creativity made the world a better place. She would have loved the idea of her house becoming a gathering place for artists and art lovers. Her legacy, my mom said, and there was ice in her voice sharp enough to cut, was family, Sunday dinners, and holiday gatherings, and grandchildren playing in that garden, not strangers tramping through her living room looking at paintings. "They wouldn't be strangers," I said, feeling my temper starting to rise. "They'd be members of the community, local artists, neighbors, people who appreciate beauty and creativity. Eleanor always said, art feeds the soul." "Eleanor said a lot of things," my dad replied, "but she also believed in family first, in keeping family traditions alive, not in turning family homes into public spaces." I could feel the conversation spiraling out of control, but I couldn't seem to stop it. This is what Eleanor would have wanted. She believed in supporting creative people, in making beauty accessible to everyone. She would have loved the idea of her house being a place where art could flourish. But it was Sophia's reaction that really caught me off guard. She'd been quiet through the whole conversation, just picking at her food and staring at her plate. But suddenly, she looked up at me with these eyes that were full of something I couldn't quite identify. Something that looked like hurt and anger and disappointment all mixed together. "Do whatever you want, Mia," she said, her voice quiet but loaded with meaning. "It's your house, right? Your decision, your legacy to protect." The way she said, "your house," made it sound like a curse word, like something dirty and selfish and wrong. I drove home that night with this knot in my stomach, wondering if I was making a huge mistake. The gallery idea had seemed so perfect, so right, so much like something Eleanor would have supported. But now my family was acting like I was desecrating her memory, like I was being selfish and disrespectful and greedy. But when I walked into Eleanor's house, when I stood in that front parlor with its beautiful windows and perfect lighting, I knew I was doing the right thing. I could almost feel Eleanor's presence in that room, encouraging me, supporting me, telling me to follow my heart. I just had no idea how far my family was willing to go to stop me. I had no idea that they were already making plans, already plotting, already deciding that if they couldn't talk me out of my dreams, they'd find another way to take them away from me. 2 weeks later, my mom called and invited me over for Sunday dinner. "We need to talk," she said, which in my family is never a good sign. But I figured maybe we could work things out like adults. Maybe they'd come around to understanding my vision for the house. God, I was naive. The moment I walked into their dining room, I could feel the tension. It was like walking into a courtroom where I was the defendant and everyone else was the prosecution. They'd clearly been talking about me before I arrived, planning their attack. We made it exactly halfway through the pot roast before my dad launched the first missile. "Mia, we've been thinking about this gallery idea of yours," he said, cutting his meat with more force than necessary. "And we think you're commercializing Grandma's memory, turning her home into some kind of business venture." "It's not a business," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I told you it's by appointment only. It's about community, about art, about keeping Eleanor's spirit alive in that house." "Eleanor's spirit was about family," my mom snapped, "about Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings and grandchildren playing in that garden. not about strangers wandering through her private spaces. I could feel my temper starting to rise, but I tried to stay reasonable. She left me that house for a reason. She trusted me to make decisions about it. That's when Sophia finally spoke up, and what she said hit me like a punch to the gut. "It should have been ours," she said quietly, but her words cut through the room like a blade. "You weren't even here when Grandma was sick. You were too busy with your important job and your independent life to visit her more than once a month. I was there every day, Mia. Every single day." The silence that followed was devastating, because she wasn't entirely wrong and we all knew it. "I was there as much as I could be," I said, hating how defensive I sounded. "I called her every day. I visited every weekend I could manage." "But you weren't there," Sophia pressed. "Not really. Not when she was scared about dying, not when she couldn't remember our names some days, not when she needed someone to hold her hand while she slept." My dad nodded along like Sophia was making perfect sense. Maybe Eleanor was confused at the end. Maybe she didn't understand what she was doing when she wrote that will. And that's when I lost it. "She chose me for a reason," I said, standing up so fast my chair scraped against the floor. "She left me that house because she knew I would preserve it, not profit from it. She knew I understood what made it special, not just what it was worth." "Oh, please," my mom said, rolling her eyes. "You think you're so special, so different from the rest of us? But at the end of the day, you're doing exactly what you want with that house, and the rest of us just have to live with it." "Yes," I said. "That's exactly right. That's because it's my house. Eleanor made that choice, not me." My parents exchanged a look that I should have paid more attention to. Then they both stood up. "We're done here," my dad said. "If you can't see how selfish you're being, then there's nothing left to discuss." They walked out of their own dining room, leaving me standing there with Sophia, who wouldn't even look at me. "Sophia," I said, "please, help me understand why everyone's so angry about this." She finally looked up at me and her eyes were full of tears. "You really don't get it, do you?" she said. "You've always been the special one, the smart one, the one who got to leave and build this amazing life while the rest of us stayed here and took care of everyone else. And now, even in death, Eleanor chose you over all of us." She left without another word. I drove home that night thinking that was the low point, that things couldn't possibly get worse between us. I was wrong. 3 weeks later, I had to go to Chicago for a work conference. 3 days of meetings, presentations, the usual corporate nonsense. The whole time I was looking forward to coming home to Eleanor's house, to the peace and quiet of that wraparound porch. I should have known something was wrong when I pulled into the driveway and saw the garbage bags. 4 black trash bags sitting on the front steps, like some kind of twisted welcome committee. And when I got closer, I could see clothes spilling out of them. My clothes, my toiletries, my photo frames. Everything I owned stuffed into garbage bags like I was being evicted. That's when I tried my key. And that's when I realized this wasn't some mistake or misunderstanding. This was a hostile takeover. I'm standing there staring at these garbage bags when my phone buzzes. A text from Sophia. "This isn't your home anymore. It belongs to all of us." I read that message 3 times before it really sank in. My sister, my own flesh and blood, had changed the locks on my house and thrown my belongings out like trash. I called her immediately, my hands shaking so bad I could barely hit her number. "Sophia, what the hell is going on? Why are my things outside? Why doesn't my key work?" Her voice when she answered was colder than I'd ever heard it. "We've been talking," she said. "Mom, Dad, and me. And we decided that this house should belong to the whole family, not just you. Eleanor may have been confused when she wrote that will, but we're fixing that now." "You can't fix a legal will by changing locks," I said, trying not to scream. "This is my house, Sophia. Legally, officially, completely mine." "Maybe legally," she said, "but not morally. And maybe this is for the best. Maybe you'll finally understand what it feels like to be shut out." She hung up on me. I stood there in Eleanor's driveway, surrounded by garbage bags full of my life, and I felt something break inside me. Not just my heart, though. That was definitely shattered. Something deeper. Some fundamental trust in the idea that family means something. I called my best friend Rachel, and she came to pick me up without asking any questions. We loaded those garbage bags into her car, and I spent the next 3 days on her couch trying to figure out what the hell had just happened to my life. But it wasn't until the second day that I realized how deep this betrayal actually went. I was going through my belongings, checking to see what was missing, when I noticed that some very specific things weren't in those garbage bags. Eleanor's jewelry, the pieces she'd specifically left to me in the will. My passport, which I kept in the house, safe. And most importantly, the original copy of Eleanor's will that had been in my possession. They weren't just trying to steal my house. They were trying to steal my proof that it was mine in the first place. Sitting on Rachel's couch that night, eating takeout Chinese food and trying not to cry, I realized that my family had declared war on me, and they weren't planning to fight fair. Rachel saved my life that week. Not just by giving me a place to stay, but by connecting me with someone who could actually fight back. "I know this lawyer," she said on day 3 of my exile. "Sophia Chen. She specializes in estate disputes and family law. If anyone can fix this mess, it's her." I met Sophia Chen the next morning in her downtown office, and I knew within 5 minutes that I'd found my warrior. She was maybe 40 sharp as a razor, and when I finished telling her my story, she leaned back in her chair and smiled like a shark who'd just spotted blood in the water. "This is a textbook case of illegal eviction," she said. "What your family did isn't just morally wrong, it's criminally stupid. Let's get you your house back, and let's do it fast." Within 48 hours, she'd filed an emergency injunction against my parents and Sophia. The court date was set for the following week, and I started to feel like maybe I could win this thing. But my family wasn't going down without a fight. That's when my mom decided to take the battle public. I was scrolling through Facebook on Rachel's couch when I saw it. A post from my mother that made my blood run cold. "So sad when children forget their roots," she'd written. "When they're willing to sell out their family heritage for money and strangers. Some people never learn that family should come first. Praying for wisdom and healing." She didn't mention my name, but she didn't have to. Everyone in our extended family, everyone in the neighborhood, everyone who'd known Eleanor, they all knew exactly who she was talking about. The comments started rolling in immediately. Neighbors who'd watched me grow up, relatives I hadn't seen in years, all of them piling on with their opinions about my character. Eleanor would be so disappointed. That house should stay in the family. Some people get a little money and forget where they came from. But here's the thing about social media witch hunts. They don't stay contained to Facebook. Within 2 days, people at my job were asking me about it. Clients were mentioning they'd heard I was having family troubles. My boss called me into his office to ask if everything was okay, and I could see the concern in his eyes. Not just about me, but about whether this drama was going to affect my work. I was drowning. Every morning, I'd wake up on Rachel's couch and check my phone, and there would be more comments, more judgment, more people who thought they knew the whole story based on my mother's carefully crafted victim narrative. The worst part, some of the comments were from people I'd considered friends. People who should have known me better than to believe I was some greedy, heartless daughter who'd stolen her grandmother's house. But you know what the really sick part was? My mom's post never actually said what I'd done wrong. She never mentioned that she'd illegally evicted me from my own house. She just painted herself as a grieving mother whose ungrateful daughter had somehow betrayed the family. It was masterful manipulation, and it was working. I started having panic attacks. Real ones where I couldn't breathe and my heart felt like it was going to explode. Rachel would find me hyperventilating in her bathroom at 2 in the morning, convinced that everyone was right, that I was the villain in this story. But Sophia Chen, my lawyer, she kept me grounded. "They're panicking," she told me during one of our prep sessions. "When people resort to public smear campaigns, it means they know they're losing. Your mother wouldn't be playing the victim on Facebook if she thought she had a strong legal case." "But what if the judge sees all this?" I asked. "What if he thinks I'm really some awful person who's tearing her family apart?" Sophia smiled that shark smile again. Mia Honey judges don't make decisions based on Facebook posts. They make decisions based on law, and the law is very, very clear about who owns that house. I held on to those words like a lifeline, because in less than a week I was going to face my family in court, and everything I'd ever believed about love, loyalty, and justice was going to be put to the test. The morning of the hearing, I woke up at 5 a.m. with my stomach in knots. This was it. The day I'd either get my house back or watch my family destroy everything Eleanor had tried to protect. Walking into that courthouse was like entering a battlefield. My parents were already there with their lawyer, a stern-looking man in an expensive suit who kept shooting me disapproving looks like I was some kind of criminal. Sophia sat beside them, but she wouldn't even look in my direction. The hearing started, and my family's lawyer came out swinging. "Your Honor," he said, "my clients believe that Miss Mia abandoned her residence for an extended period, effectively relinquishing any claim to habitation. Furthermore, we have concerns about the circumstances under which the will was executed." Then he said something that made my blood run cold. "We have reason to believe that Miss Mia used coercion and emotional manipulation to influence her elderly grandmother, taking advantage of a woman who was suffering from age-related cognitive decline." I felt like I'd been slapped. They were actually claiming that I'd manipulated Eleanor, that I'd somehow tricked a 91-year-old woman into leaving me her house. Sophia Chen stood up and her voice was ice. "Your Honor, these are serious accusations with absolutely no supporting evidence. My client has legal documentation proving ownership, including a properly executed will that was witnessed and notarized. What we have here is a clear case of illegal eviction by family members who disagree with the deceased's final wishes." The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, listened to both sides present their arguments. She reviewed the will, the property deed, and all the documentation Sophia had prepared. Then she looked up and her expression was stern. "I've heard enough," she said. "Miss Mia is the legal owner of the property at 847 Elm Street. The will is valid, properly executed, and there is no evidence of coercion or undue influence. Locking her out of her own home was unlawful regardless of any family disputes about the inheritance." She banged her gavel. "Emergency injunction granted. Miss Mia is to be given immediate access to her property, and all parties are ordered to return any personal belongings or documents removed from the premises." I wanted to cry with relief. I'd won. The house was mine legally and officially. But as we were walking out of the courthouse, my parents' lawyer whispered something to my dad, and I saw my father nod grimly. That should have been my first warning. Sophia Chen and I were standing on the courthouse steps, discussing next steps, when I noticed a police officer approaching us. At first, I thought maybe he was just walking by, but then he stopped directly in front of me. "Excuse me, are you Mia Thompson?" "Yes," I said, confused. "I need to speak with you about a theft complaint that's been filed against you." The world tilted sideways. "I'm sorry. What?" The officer looked uncomfortable, like he didn't really want to be having this conversation. "Your parents have filed a complaint alleging that you stole jewelry, documents, and other valuable items from their residence. I need to ask you some questions." I stared at him, then at Sophia Chen, who looked as shocked as I felt. "Officer," Sophia said, stepping forward, "my client just won a court case proving that she's the rightful owner of the property in question. Any items she removed would have been her own belongings." "I understand that, ma'am," the officer said, "but the complaint specifically mentions items taken from their home, not the disputed property. I still need to follow up on the report." My own parents had called the police on me. They just lost in court, so now they were trying to have me arrested. Standing there on those courthouse steps with people walking past us like it was just another Tuesday, I realized that this war was far from over. In fact, it was just getting started. I spent the next 2 days answering questions from the police, providing receipts and documentation for every piece of jewelry Eleanor had left me, proving that I hadn't stolen anything from my parents. It was humiliating and exhausting, but Sophia Chen was right there with me every step of the way. The theft charges were eventually dropped, but the damage was done. My family had tried to have me arrested. My own parents had looked a police officer in the eye and accused their daughter of being a criminal. I was back in Eleanor's house, but it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a fortress under siege. That's when I got the email that changed everything. I was sitting at Eleanor's kitchen table, trying to figure out how to move forward with my life when my laptop chimed with a new message. The sender was someone I'd never heard of, Patricia Wilson. The subject line read, "About Eleanor and what really happened." My hands were shaking as I opened it. "Dear Mia," it began, "you don't know me, but I was Eleanor's friend and part-time caregiver during her final months. I've been following the legal disputes in the news, and I think you need to know the truth about what your parents were trying to do before Eleanor died." I had to read that sentence 3 times before it sank in. Patricia went on to explain that she'd been hired by Eleanor to help with daily tasks, but that she'd also become a confidant. And in that role, she'd witnessed things that made my blood run cold. "Your parents visited Eleanor multiple times in her last few months, pressuring her to sell the house and move into assisted living. They told her it was too much for her to handle, that she was becoming a burden." Eleanor was heartbroken by these conversations. But here's the part that made me want to throw up. I have voice recordings of some of these conversations, Mia. Eleanor asked me to record them because she was afraid your parents might try to claim she was mentally incompetent. She wanted proof that her mind was clear and that her decisions were her own. Patricia had attached audio files to the email. With trembling fingers, I clicked on the first one. Eleanor's voice, weak but determined, filled the kitchen. "If they keep trying to force me, I'll have no choice but to declare them unfit to make decisions about my care or my property. This house is going to Mia. That's my decision, and it's my truth. She's the only one who understands what this place really means." Then I heard my father's voice, and it was like a knife to my heart. "Mom, you're not thinking clearly. Mia doesn't need this house. She has her own life, her own place. But Sophia needs stability. She needs family around her." Eleanor's response was sharp as glass. "Sophia is welcome here anytime, just like all of you. But this house belongs to Mia after I'm gone. That's final." There were 3 more recordings. In each one, my parents became more insistent, more manipulative. They talked about Eleanor's declining mental state, about how she couldn't be trusted to make big decisions anymore. But Eleanor's voice remained clear, strong, and absolutely certain about what she wanted. The last recording was the most damaging. My mother's voice, sweet as poison. "We just think you should consider what's best for the whole family, Eleanor, not just what Mia wants." And Eleanor's final words on the recording, "Linda, if you mention selling this house one more time, I'm calling my lawyer and changing my will to make sure none of you can contest it. This conversation is over." I was crying by the time the last recording ended. Not just because of what my parents had done, but because Eleanor had known. She'd known they would try this, and she'd prepared for it. I forwarded everything to Sophia Chen immediately. Her response came back within an hour. "Holy shit, Mia. Excuse my language, but this changes everything. Your parents just went from being nuisances to being potential criminals. Elder abuse, coercion, and fraud. They're about to have much bigger problems than a disputed will." Sophia called my parents' lawyer that afternoon. I don't know exactly what she said, but it must have been effective, because 24 hours later, a settlement proposal arrived. My parents would publicly apologize for their actions, return all of Eleanor's belongings. They'd take and pay me $50,000 in damages and agree to a no-contact order. In exchange, I wouldn't press charges for elder abuse or fraud. The war was over, and I'd won. But the victory felt hollow because winning meant accepting that my family had never really loved me the way I'd loved them. The settlement meeting was scheduled for a Thursday morning. My parents, their lawyer Sophia Chen, and I, all sitting around a conference table to officially end this nightmare. My parents looked like they'd aged 10 years in the past few months. My dad wouldn't meet my eyes, and my mom kept dabbing at her face with the tissues, like she was the victim in all this. They signed the papers, agreeing to everything. The public apology returning Eleanor's jewelry, and documents $50,000 in damages, and most importantly, a no-contact clause that meant they couldn't harass me anymore. But there was one person missing from that room. Sophia didn't show up. Instead, she left a letter with their lawyer. When he handed it to me, I almost didn't want to read it. But I opened it right there at the conference table. Mia, it said in her familiar handwriting, I can't face you today. I know what we did was wrong, but I need you to understand something. I just wanted to be loved like you were. Eleanor always looked at you like you hung the moon, and I spent my whole life trying to earn that same look. I'm sorry for everything, but I'm not sorry for wanting what you had. I folded the letter and put it in my purse without saying a word. There wasn't anything left to say. 3 months later, I finally did what I dreamed of doing from the beginning. I opened Eleanor's gallery. The front parlor of the house was transformed into a beautiful, intimate space where local artists could showcase their work. Not for profit, just for the joy of sharing creativity with the community. Exactly what Eleanor would have wanted. The opening night was magical. Neighbors who'd known Eleanor came to see what I'd done with her house. Friends from work, people I'd met through Rachel artists from all over Boston. The house was filled with laughter and conversation and the kind of creative energy that makes a place feel truly alive. My cousin Ben, who'd stayed out of all the family drama, showed up with his wife and kids. He'd always been the mediator in our family, the one who tried to keep everyone together. When he saw what I'd created, he got tears in his eyes. Eleanor would be so proud, he said. This is exactly what she meant when she talked about preserving the soul of this place. Ben ended up becoming my business partner in a way. He helped me connect with more artists, organize events, and turn the gallery into a real community hub. It turns out that when you're not fighting a war, you have a lot more energy to build something beautiful. The no-contact order meant I didn't hear from my parents or Sophia for almost a year. And honestly, I didn't miss the drama. For the first time in my adult life, I felt peace. I was sitting on Eleanor's porch swing one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky pink and orange when I remembered something she'd told me years ago. Mia, she'd said, you may not be able to control everything that happens to you, but you control who you become because of it. At the time, I thought she was just being wise in that way grandmothers are. But sitting there in the house she'd trusted me to protect, surrounded by the life I'd built from the ashes of my family's betrayal, I finally understood what she meant. My parents tried to take my home. My sister tried to steal my inheritance. They dragged me through courts and police stations and public humiliation. But in the end, they didn't take anything from me. They gave me back my power. They showed me that I was stronger than I ever knew, that I could stand up for myself when it mattered, that I could build a life based on love and creativity, instead of obligation and guilt. Eleanor's house isn't just my home now. It's my sanctuary, my gallery, my gift to the community. It's proof that sometimes the best way to honor someone's memory isn't to keep everything exactly as they left it. Sometimes it's to let their love grow into something even more beautiful than they ever imagined. And every time I unlock that front door, every time I turn that key that finally truly belongs to me, I remember that home isn't just a place you inherit. It's a place you choose to protect, to nurture, and to share with the people who really matter. The people who see your soul, the way Eleanor saw mine. What do you think about Mia's choice to fight back instead of walking away? Have you ever had to stand up to your own family when they crossed the line? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to hear more stories about family drama betrayal and people finding their strength when it matters most, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next.